Over time, I've noticed that in most families, there is a person that is what I would call the glue. They're the ones that hold the family together, that keep the relationships humming, that repair the brokenness that occurs in families between one another. They're the ones that step in, particularly in times of crisis, and become the center, the rock that gets them through. I see this particularly at times of death. They're the ones that come in and are responsible for making the funeral arrangements, making sure everybody gets called and knows what page everybody needs to be on, what their responsibilities are. They're the ones on the day of the funeral that make sure that everybody's needs are being taken care of. Or they're the ones that are lying in the casket. In which case, the family has more than likely come unglued because they don't know how to function. Their leader is now dead. How do they go on? It's a tough question for families in those situations. This person of glueness is true not only in families, but we see this in the life of church communities, in towns and villages and cities. And most recently, we've seen it within our nation and the world. There are those who function as glue in times of crisis and can rally the nation or the community or the church together. And there are those who do more damage in scattering the sheep. And so we find in the biblical narrative such times. There are times like with Moses and David. These are giants in the glue business. Moses forms a people out of a desperate, disparate group of ragtag wanderers. David will forge a nation out of 12 tribes. At the same time, there are those within the leadership of Israel that almost abdicate their responsibility. These are times that the prophets speak often of the people being like sheep without a shepherd. You see, one of the interesting pieces of the political life of Israel is that they are the only nation in the Middle East in those days that uses the model of shepherd as defining what the king, the leadership, should be like. To be king is to be shepherd of the people and to provide for their needs. I've shared on other occasions, the best job description for the king of Israel is the 23rd Psalm. The king is to provide all that the people need, that they may live in security, in health, and without want. There is a time leading into the exile of Babylon that the kings have done a particularly poor job. In fact, God announces that the kings have scattered the sheep more than held them together. And that because of this, God has no other choice than to become the shepherd. And it is in that role that God steps in prior to the exile and will lead and sustain and provide for his sheep in the midst of that trial time, and eventually lead them home back to those green pastures and cool waters of Jerusalem. It is God who sustains them in this time of trial, surrounding them with the faithful, reminding them of their story, keeping them ever creative and innovative as they look to the future. it is this motif of God as shepherd, particularly in the midst of the lack of good shepherds, that gets picked up in the New Testament. In the Gospels, we hear Jesus often comment, particularly when he finds the people in desolate places or in desperate times, that they are like sheep without a shepherd. And what we find is that Jesus' first response is to heal and to feed. And we'll talk more about that feeding in the weeks to come. What's very interesting at the end of John's Gospel is this touching scene following the resurrection between Jesus and Peter. Jesus is in the process of trying to heal the brokenness caused by Peter's denial. And so Jesus questions his loyalty, his love for him. To which Peter responds affirmatively that he does indeed love Jesus. And to each affirmation, Jesus issues a call to go feed the sheep. For John, the job of the church is to be a shepherding community, to care for the needs of the flock. But Jesus in John's Gospel also reminds us that there are those that do not belong to the flock, that are also the flock's responsibility. And so our task is not only to care for the needs of our local church community, but also to begin to look outside of our walls. And how do we care for the needs of those around us, particularly in times of crisis as we have gone through? How do we do that? What does that look like? Well, I would suggest that if you really take this job of shepherding seriously, you need to spend some time meditating on the 23rd Psalm. It is the job description of the church. We need no other mission statement. If we do those things, we will be faithful to our call to feed the sheep, to be those communities that people can count on in times of crisis, to know that there is stability and security, to know there is a place where their needs will be taken care of, to be trusted, and to be led forward, even if that means walking through the valleys of the shadow of death. It is that community that surrounds each and every one of us in these times of need, and will continue to be present with us. For it is through the church that God continues to work his miracles, to feed and to care for the hungry, the poor, the lonely. And he gives us models as he calls us before the cool, still waters of our baptism, or as he gathers us at table to eat and to drink. Or perhaps it's the words of comfort, or that great cloud of witnesses that he surrounds us with, particularly when we need them most. We are called to be the glue in the midst of times when everything seems to be coming unglued. And we dare to do this because we have a good shepherd, a model that goes before us and that provides all that we need, so that we shall not want, even in times like these. Have no fear, little flock, have no fear, little flock, for the Father has chosen to give you the kingdom. Have no fear, little flock. Have good cheer, little flock. Have good cheer, little flock. For the Father will keep you in his love forever. Have no fear, little flock. Thankful hearts raise to God, thankful hearts raise to God, for he stays close beside you, to all things works with you. Thankful hearts raise to God.